Hey guys, this is Bao, and welcome to another chess improvement video. Today we're going to continue on with the limited tactics motif chess custom limited tactics custom set that we made with forks and pins. But I'm going to do a little something to change the custom set a little bit. Thinking about it, I think there's a way that we can really kind of, what would be the word? Not condense or coalesce, but more about the idea of refining the set to its specific. Mm, hmm, hmm, I can't think of the correct word right now, but basically, instead of having a bunch of puzzles that are a little bit too varied with a sprinkling of the themes that we want, I think I have a way of making the puzzles a little bit easier for a lower level person, as well as refining. That's the word I was thinking of. Refining the puzzle set to its most essential parts. So, what I'm going to do is I'm still going to choose fork and I'm going to choose pin. But instead of allowing for one move to 99 moves, I'm going to only allow about 1 to 3 moves. And since there aren't that many moves, the chances that if a puzzle is tagged with one of these two motifs and is within 3 moves is going to be fairly strong. So let's do that. Tactic problem types. All problems, non-winning problems, winning problems. We'll do winning problems. Outcome type, all. Quality. Let's still keep it at 4 and see how many we get. Number of pieces doesn't really matter. And game number move doesn't really matter. And I think everything else here is just kind of like a individual meta criteria, problems I've gotten wrong, etc., etc. So that's fine. And none of the player information really matters, so let's do a search for this. We get 1,293. That's pretty good. And we'll make this pins and forks. Well, actually, before we make it, maybe we should manage the problem sets, and we'll remove this one. Okay, now we'll create this one. Pins and forks. Alright, and yeah, let's try this one. I think this problem set is going to be a bit more, problem set I think is going to be a bit more specific to the things we want to practice. Yesterday I tried making a video, but then I said some really, really silly things, and some of the puzzles weren't that great. One of the puzzles we got was like close to 8, 9 moves, and the pin part and the fork part were not that huge of a part. And so, although it was a very interesting tactical puzzle, I feel like we were taking too long on the puzzles, and we weren't really kind of absorbing the lessons that we were trying to learn. So let's give this a try and see if it's any better today. Alright, so black's move to c5. Oh, excuse me, I just woke up. Black's move to c5, and we're thinking of pins and forks here. Potential double attacks. First thing I see is knight takes knight on c6, but then bishop takes knight, and I don't see anything that great about that. I don't particularly see a specific pin here. If there's going to be any kind of pin, it would be done with his rooks and his his rook and his bishop, or my rook and my bishop. But it doesn't look like that's the case. So and with how many knights there are on board, I'm thinking maybe there might be some kind of double attack going on. Our kings are looking at each other. Mm. Mm-mm-mm. Hmm. Let's see here. Our king can't attack the knights. Um, our bishop is kind of stuck on the three back rings. Potential moves that we can make are knight takes knight, either of the knights to d3, and potentially rook to d1. But I'm not exactly sure what we're looking for here. So his knight moved to c5, and it's closer to our pieces, which is kind of dangerous. But he doesn't have a lot of options for where to go. a4 is met with a knight trade, and then I get his close pawn, so that's his close pass pawn, so that would be more beneficial to me. D3 is the same, knight takes knight, and then, or I could just move my bishop as well, so that's not really an issue either. Well, if we continue on with knight takes knight on c6, bishop takes knight, then the king can, oh, I see. Then the king can move to b4 for a double attack on his knight as well as his bishop. So what would happen is knight takes knight on c6, bishop takes knight on c6, king to b4, probably knight to d3, king takes bishop, knight takes knight, rook takes knight, and then we get the pin or the pass pawn. That being said, after king takes b4, there are actually a lot of options, so we should be careful and think about what exactly could happen. Oh, also knight to d3 is a check, but it's not something we have to worry about. So here are some potentials. When king goes to b4, instead of the knight moving, actually the chances that the rook will be moving are much higher. So king to b4, double attack. Actually, yeah, double attack on the rook and knight. Rook's gonna move. Where is the rook going to move? That's a good question. That is a good question. I guess the rook could move to a2, or the rook could move to a6. Definitely has to be somewhere on the A line. It can't be a5 or a3 or a4. a2, a1 is no go. a6 potentially. a7 and a8 seem regressive and not necessarily very good for the rook. Oh, actually, dear me, I misplaced the bishop in my mind. Knight takes knight, bishop takes knight. So actually he can go to a4. And a4 comes with a check, so potentially that's, I think, what he might do. So that seems like the most reasonable outcome of this. Rook takes rook, bishop takes, or I'm sorry, knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, king to b4, rook to a4, check, king takes b5, knight. Let's see if that's true. Oh no, all the way to A8. Interesting. Okay. Well, that worked out pretty well. I'm fairly happy with how I calculated that puzzle. Um, I'm curious about what A8 is about. Perhaps there's some ideas. Maybe just guarding the passed pawn still. I would imagine. Oh, I'm sorry about all the yawning. Um, but honestly, he has to deal with saving his bishop before anything like that. So probably the bishop's gonna also regress back to d7, or I would guess e7. I don't know. It's tricky to say. But anyway, that was yeah, that definitely dealt with one of our motifs very quickly. So I'm very happy about that. Okay, next puzzle. Let's take a look here. We got two defenders on the knight on d6, so that's not great. The queen is blocking the black king's flight square on g7, so that's pretty awesome. If there was some way to distract his rook on the 8th rank somewhere, uh, that would be great. But the issue is the e8 square is also defended by his knight, so not only do we have to distract his rook, we have to distract his knight. And as we said before, it's defended by two pieces, so that's not easy. Especially when we have two pieces of our own, and the queen's, if we want to go for a mating pattern, the queen has to stay on that diagonal, so that doesn't seem to be the case. Oh, that being said, I clearly missed queen taking f7 for a check, leading to a checkmate very soon after. So in that case, all we have to do is distract that knight because he's the only defender. He's the only second defender for f7. So if there was some kind of way to distract that knight on f7, that would be super awesome. But there aren't any other pieces that I can use quickly to make that happen. Meanwhile, black feels safe enough over on his king side that he's pushing a pawn. Curious to know what that push-up is about as well. So we're dealing with pin pieces here. That knight is pinned. But there's no way to start questioning his pin, I don't think. Ah, okay. That being said, here's the thing. Instead of queen takes f7, if rook takes f7, we are one move away from imminent checkmate, and so the knight has to take the rook on f7. Uh, any other move would lead to checkmate for black, and so after the knight does take on f7 because of the pin between our two queens, I would be trading a rook for a queen, and so I guess that is the puzzle. And there we go. Excellent. Okay. Let's go to the next puzzle. We're on a minor piece deficit. There's a lot of pawns and a couple of passed ones as well. So this is a very interesting situation. First thing I see is, why can't I just take bishop? That just leads to a straight check. King has to move. And at that point I can take care of the h4 pawn. Oh no, I can't take care of the h4 pawn because of a knight hasn't moved. So bishop takes bishop on f6. then the two places the king can go to are either g8 or h7. At which point, I guess a fairly good move at this point would be bishop to d8, forcing movement for the c pawn. C pawn has to move up, and either by en passant or by taking, we would now have a pass pawn on the c rank, which is great because it can start going for the 8th rank, and the knight can't defend against it. So I think I'm going to say that's my answer to this puzzle. Oh, that wasn't the answer at all. Oh, I don't understand. Oh, I see. I can get rid of both of the pieces by moving my pawn. That's what the answer was. The idea is that the bishop is pinned, and so if I move my pawn, I have one more step until getting a queen. So the idea would be that the knight would take on e7, at which point I can take bishop, king moves, and I take the knight. That being said, I don't think my line is any worse, because either way, I'm taking down a crap ton of pawns, but yeah, this is probably much more elegant, actually. That is very, very elegant compared to the rough and tumble kind of idea I had of trying to promote my pawn while blocking his knight. So, yeah, should have maybe, I don't know. In that kind of situation, I'm not exactly sure what I could have done better. That's a tricky one. Let's think about it for a second. The answer I had doesn't seem nigh improbable. It seems like a very kind of logical move that I would make in a chess game. However, that being said, um, I guess there is that saying, I forget which grandmaster said it, but when you find a good move, you should find a better move. I guess it comes down to patience in a way. You just gotta be a little bit more patient and check out more tactics to see if there's something good out there. And that actually in of itself is probably a very important skill. Not only in the simple idea of just getting better and improving, but just in the sense of in games, just because you see a first move that seems plausible, that doesn't mean that you should just stop there. Um, yeah, I think there's some kind of deeper benefit there, the patience, but I'm not exactly sure. That being said, let's move on to the next puzzle. So, my rook on d5 is in trouble, but if the knight does take the rook on d5, the queen is pinned, so that's no good. Hmm. Okay. Some other pieces on the board. I have a knight that's fairly far back. He's not doing much. Um, is there a way to move the knight away, or either take the knight because of his pin in some kind of manner? If I try to move uh, my f pawn to get to the knight, it's going to take way too many moves. There has to be an f5, an f4, and an e4 to make all of that work. And yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Another pin that could potentially happen is by moving the rook to c5. But after that, I'm not exactly sure how we can really utilize that pin. Another way to put pressure on that knight would be bishop to c5. However, bishop to c5 isn't as great because in this pin scenario, minor piece trade doesn't sound that exotic anyway. It's not really a detriment or a loss to him at all. So there are some potentials for pins. I'm not exactly sure what potentials we have for double attacks. He has a rook on h1, so his back rank is definitely guarded. That being said, if my queen were to end up on a1, that wouldn't be a bad place to be for a turn. Especially if he wasn't able to hit the second rank. But that doesn't seem likely. Queen to d2 would be good, but the bishop is a good guarder. If we do move rook to c5, then our bishop plans of c5 or b4 are taken out as well. The bishop becomes a stuck piece. So that's not necessarily great. The knight can always move to b5. So do we want to just pin the bishop, move the knight, potentially take bishop on c3 with the knight, knight takes bishop c3, pawn takes knight, queen takes pawn on c3, check? That seems slow. That doesn't seem effective. Lukewarm, I guess, would be a word for it. These two pieces in my second rank, I feel like, could be a key somewhere. Could be an extra helping block in this situation. But I'm not exactly sure how. As we know, as dangerous as that knight looks on e3 looking at my rook, d5 isn't really an issue. So there's the pin. Rook to c5, pin. I feel like there are plenty of other moves at that point which could be made, such as rook to h1, which seems really good. So, yeah, that doesn't seem like the answer either. What about knight to c5 as my first move? Does that help with anything? I don't think so. I don't think so. Does bishop to e3 help with anything? Bishop to e3, rook to d1, bishop takes b3, bishop takes bishop, White seems to be defending fine. So I don't think there's anything there. I was thinking it would be really cool bishop to b3 pawn takes, or bishop to a3 pawn takes bishop, queen takes bishop on c3, but no, there's no reason why he has to do that. He can easily take a turn to defend better with rook to d1. If the rook and the queen were traded positions, then h1 would actually be kind of a dangerous situation. But actually, then the tactic that I was thinking of wouldn't work very well. Yeah, I don't know what the first necessary candidate move is here. I guess another thing we can think about would be rook to f5. Putting pressure on the queen there. But if that were to happen, rook to f5, there are plenty of flight squares for the queen. She can ask for a trade on d1. She can just move to g2. She can move to g3 or h3 as well. So, and g4. So I don't really think there's an issue at all. Rook to f5, pressure on the queen. Queen goes to, let's say, g2. What am I winning here? Nothing. Nothing. Yeah, I don't know. Bishop to b4 would be met with bishop takes bishop with no real trepidation or loss for white either. I have to say his two minor pieces in defense are doing a very good job. They are definitely making my life a bit harder. And although I have two major pieces in aggression, I can't seem to find a way around it. Oh boy. What could it be? I don't think it's something as slow as e5. And trying to make the pawns exchange with the pin and knight, actually, I can't only use just the f and e file pawns. I have to use the g pawn as well to make anything like that happen, which is a ridiculous amount of moves. There's got to be a g6 somewhere in there. There's got to be an e5, f5, and finally an f4 after that. That's just way too many moves for that. I don't think there's any kind of sacrifice, but maybe I'm wrong. The only really sacrificable piece at this point, however, is the queen, and I don't think the knight by him or the rook by himself against so many defensive pieces could really make it worth his while. I mean, there is potentially queen sacks on c3, queen takes c3, pawn takes 3, c3, bishop on b4. King can either go to, or bishop on bishop on a3 is what I meant to say. Then king can go to b1 or c2. If c2, we're SOL, so that doesn't seem like the line. I guess I'm gonna try the bishop on a3 line again. Bishop a3, rook d1. I guess at that point, queen could take bishop. Queen takes bishop c3. King has to move to b1. That's the only place, and then that's checkmate. So after bishop goes to a3, actually, yeah, the pawn is going to have to take on a3, which means queen takes bishop, and king has to move still to b1 because the rook has the d file. And then if that's the case, so bishop a3, pawn takes bishop, queen takes bishop c3, check, king to b1, and then we can just lawnmower the rook to b5, and that's checkmate. So I guess that's what I've been looking for this whole time. That being said, actually, king to b1 isn't the only possible thing that he can do. Actually, knight blocking after queen takes on c3, knight blocking on c2 is possible, but then that's when we make use of the pin and we can take the queen. So I think that's a potential line here. Currently the king can't move anywhere anyway, and if he does try to help out, instead of the rook going to h1, what happens if the queen goes to h1 after bishop a3? Bishop a3, queen to h1, queen still takes queen, and then it's going to lead to a checkmate very soon. Queen still takes queen. Well, and then the queen can block, actually. So it would be bishop a3, queen to h1, queen takes bishop on c3, check, queen blocks c2. Queen blocks c2, bishop takes pawn b2, check, king has to move. Can't move to d1 because of my rook, so it has to move to b1. I wonder if I'm doing that part right. So after queen blocks on c2, I mean, I could just trade queens and move my bishop back, but I don't know if that's what the puzzle would want. As a very cowardly player, I'd be okay with that. But I'm not exactly sure. So what is the answer if, let's say, queen took c3, check, queen blocks c2, bishop takes pawn b2, check, king b1. So then the two queens are on the c file, c3 and c2. My bishop is on b2. I have a rook still around. He's still got his knight and his rook down there on h1. Can I potentially do some kind of rook d1 move? Rook takes rook. I don't see anything good happening from there. Yeah, because of that queen h1 line, this has become a lot harder. I think the best that I can say is bishop to a3, queen to h1, queen takes c3 check, queen blocks, bishop takes pawn check, king to b1, queen takes queen, and then bishop runs away. That seems to be the best line that I can think of so far. Alright, well, let's try it out and see what happens. We've definitely spent a lot of time here, and yeah, that seems to be the right move, and they decided they don't want to see what happens afterwards. We're just going with you've won a bishop. That was an okay tactic, I guess, puzzle-wise. It's nice because it's very kind of situated in real life. It's definitely a situation I could see myself getting into in a real game. But I feel like if you are going to do the material count, it's unfair to leave it in a situation where it looks like you're gonna have to choose between your queen and your bishop. I feel like it would only be fair to clear up all of the incongruities and the tension in the trade to show what's gonna have to happen. But yeah, I think that was a fairly good puzzle. Did take us forever to figure it out, though. I think it was because, as they say, it's a very quiet move, the bishop going to a3. But, yeah, that worked out pretty well. Okay, so I'm at 3 out of 4 right now. Let's see if we can do another puzzle here. Another puzzle. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. So, a move that I really, really like right now when I first see this puzzle is knight to b5, which either will push the king to his back rank in a kind of a reverse shield, kind of more like a back rank cage, or it will push him to b6 or a6, which seems like, I mean, that's terrible, because then there's knight to c7 with, you know, what is it, double attack. So I don't think that's gonna be it. But seeing as how we're doing pins and forks, that's definitely seems like a potential. I would like to think about the king moving to a8 or b8 first. So let's say our knight does go b5 check, and king goes a8 or b8. What then? Oh, you know what? a8 is terrible as well because it's still in that royal fork. So b8 is the only real answer that's possible in this situation. So knight b5 check, king to a8. At which point we have queen to d6 check. Pretty unblockable. So then the king has to still go somewhere in this situation. I guess it would be c8. However, c8 leads to checkmate because the c7 square is guarded by my knight on b5. So that means then a8 is the only other option, at which point the royal fork happens. And then maybe the king will have a flight square, but that looks like what this puzzle is. So compared to the last puzzle, this one is very, very obvious, a very tactic situation. And yes, I forgot to mention that the only way to stop all of this from happening without him just losing the queen is to trade the queen for the knight. Yeah. I'm not actually that angry about missing the queen takes the knight, because I did think about it. I just forgot to mention it as I was talking about it. I didn't realize that knight to b5 line was so detrimental. So yeah, it did make sense that the computer's response to knight b5 would be the queen taking, so that at least there is only a slight minor piece difference, like it would be like missing a rook, rather than just missing straight up a queen. So, okay, that's pretty cool. Fairly easy one. Let's do another one since that one was so quick. Queen is in a very, very dangerous spot. Black's king is in a very dangerous spot. However, I can't actually do anything about that because my queen is pinned to his queen, which was a very interesting situation. Let's see what we'll be trying. The first thing that I think of is queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, pawn takes passing pawn. I don't know. We have a very, very far past pawn, so potentially we could do something like pawn to e7. But pawn to e7 is actually met with queen takes rook. Oh, but then if queen takes rook, then my queen also takes rook. And my passed pawn is still fairly close to the end. And if he pushes d3 for his pawn, then I go e8 promote. His pawn takes my pawn, my queen takes his pawn, but then it's still a queen-queen game, so that's not a huge loss for anybody. So if queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, pawn e7, rook takes pawn, rook takes pawn, that seems pretty good. I mean, we are one. Not only are we one step closer to promotion than he is, but we have the tempo. Another idea is, why don't I just take his rook? Oh, right, because of the pin. Forgot about the pin again. Okay, here's another idea. What about I try to de-pin us by moving my rook to d5? What then? Then the queen takes our pawn. So that doesn't seem great. and her rook is still guarded. So we'd just be losing the tempo on that. So queen takes queen in this situation seems pretty good, so that we can keep the tempo and keep on pushing. That being said, let's take a look at some other lines that are possible. Rook takes h7 check. It's a forced check. The king is going to have to take. Then I have nothing because I'm still pinned. Ha 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 ha. So it seems like queen takes queen is the right answer in this situation. Or at least to me it seems that way. So queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, pawn to e7. Let's say d3. How do we promote that? King to f1. Rook has to move to e4. Then f3. Just because our pawn's so close doesn't mean it's going to be an easy fight. Especially if our king is blocked off from getting to the other side to deal with his d-pawn as well. Because at some point that means we'll have to do a pawn exchange between his d-pawn and my e-pawn. So that's not great. The other idea would be queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, king to f1 immediately afterwards, then rook takes pawn. So no, that's not it. This is a tricky one. Queen takes queen seems to be the idea. I think my brain is finally starting to slow down after doing so many of these tactics today, seriously. I've already forgotten why e7 wasn't a good one. e7 means queen takes rook. Then I take his rook. Oh, right, I remember this line. It just led to a queen-queen battle, and there wasn't really anything good. I would hate to just feel defeated and give up now, but this endgame seems very clearly even so far. I wouldn't say draw-ish, especially since at my level mistakes are made so often, but against the computer right now, I don't know. Queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, e7. That's so close. If there was just a way to move the king to the 8th rank for a second to give him a check, that'd be so good. E7, d3, e8 promote, rook takes thing, rook takes d3. That's boring. That's not it. What about rook takes d4? Rook takes d4. Queen takes pawn. We've already explored that line. Well, we explored a similar line with rook to d5. Bums. It can't just be a trade of the pawns. It has to be some kind of promotion. But how is a promotion possible? Bums. Bums. Maybe I should try that E7 line again. Maybe I was reading that wrong. E7, queen takes rook, queen takes rook. D3, E8. E8 queen. Pawn takes queen, queen takes queen, or pawn takes queen, queen takes pawn, queen. Okay, so instead of promoting immediately, oh, E7, queen takes rook, D3, E8 promote to queen, queen, pawn takes queen, queen takes queen. Pawn promote. Fuck. E7, queen takes rook, D3. Fuck. E7 with rooks or with queens. So, is it more promising to trade the queens and go for the promotion? Or is it better to do the pawn push, straight up go for the queen promotions? I don't know. This is a tricky one. I've spent 10 minutes on this one, and I honestly don't know how this will go. Here's another thing. E7, queen takes queen, king takes queen, D3. That just leads to us trading. Or actually, D3 is fine. Huh. Rook to E1, I guess? No, geez. So none of these really lead to any kind of... Oh, boy. So I don't know what to do. I feel like if that's the case, do I use my first tempo? I guess thinking about the second line, the E7 line compared to the queen takes queen line, it's better if I start the my moves with tempo and make him trade down first in this situation. But I don't know how to actually use that to my advantage. Okay, well, at this point, I feel like we've exhausted all of our options, so we'll just give this a try and see what happens. And so the queen takes queen was the wrong idea. Is it E7? No, E7 is wrong as well. So let's look at the right idea. Wow, it was the D5 block? I think I need the analysis for this because I am very curious about what's going on here. And why is this so darn small? Holy cow. Da 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 da. Okay, so from here, when we do this, can't he do that? Komodo, go! Oh, wow. I didn't see the mating on that. I see. So that's why he can't take that. So in exchange we have to do that and then I win because I have a queen now. Okay. So what I lacked in this puzzle was... Huh. Oh. I was going to ask why it looks so weird. So what I lacked in this puzzle was thinking outside of the box. I was only so focused on the promoting pawns, the queens and the rooks, that I completely forgot about how exposed his king was, even though 10 minutes ago, at the very beginning of this goddamn puzzle, I had said that king is exposed. If I wasn't under a pin, he'd be in so much danger. Oh boy. Well, that just goes to show that it's very, very important when you think about puzzles or any situations in a game. It's good to take note of everything that's going on. Especially since this game relies on capturing the king. It's such an obvious blunder. Terrible, terrible blunder on my part. I got so involved in such a minute fight that I forgot. What do they say? Won the battle but lost the war? That's basically what happened here. Thought about promoting too much and lost sight of the checkmate. So that's a really good lesson to end on, actually. Couple of good lessons, actually. Um, and I feel really good about today because based on the mistakes I made in yesterday's video that I didn't get to put out, a lot of the mistakes that I've been making continuously, I try to really make sure not to make the same mistakes today, which were once you figure out the potential tactical line, make sure to go over it again and see if there's any blockers and alternative moves that the opponent can make, which I feel like I did a fairly good job today. But I think we learned a couple of really big lessons that are going to take some time today, which is patience. Even if you feel like you have a winning tactical line, try to find other tactical lines. And that actually is appropriate for yesterday as well, because yesterday I found we did a puzzle, or I did a puzzle. Nobody's going to see that video. I did a puzzle where I got a mate in 4, but it turned out there was an easier mate in 3 solution. So, yeah, patience. After you find the line, try to find another line. And then, that being said, let's see. The other one we learned today is be sure to broaden your perspective, I guess. Be sure to look at all other potential lines within the puzzle. Don't only focus on what you think are the important parts. Which is really hard to say. That's like saying, hey, when you do a tactical puzzle, not only try to figure out the tactical puzzle, try to see it in a broader range, but if you're going to be playing chess, well, that's something you've got to do. So yeah, I'm really happy that the D5 line turned out to be the right line. But it is really sad and very cool that there was a reason why the queen couldn't take e6, just straight up because that would lead to a checkmate, which I didn't see. But yeah, that's fairly cool. Okay, well, I guess that's it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. So far, nobody's watching, but that's because I haven't shared it to anybody yet. Um, Before I leave, I think it is a good idea that I make note of the lessons I've learned so far while doing tactics. One of the points being, once you think you've figured out a tactical line, redo the line for alternative opponent moves, especially blocks. Once you think you've figured out the answer to a tactic, try to find a better tactic. When you're solving a tactical puzzle, do not get tunnel visioned, take a step back and look at other potential threats. And it might be good to specify what happened. Was trying to promote, didn't see checkmate. So, yeah. That kind of thing. I think it's good to write these down, and what I'll do is I'll make a new Google Drive note, or actually I'll just put this in the chess improvement file document that I created in episode 1 of chess improvement video, and then next time maybe we'll bring this up to take a look at. I know there are another couple of more basic fallacies that I was making, but I don't remember them quite yet, so maybe next time as we're doing the puzzles I'll do something stupid and we can fix them then. But yeah, hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you're watching this, you're probably binging all of my past chess stuff. That's the only way this would happen. But maybe something we'll talk about after I do about 10 episodes is start thinking about how we're going to put these chess videos up and where we're going to share them. I'm thinking I'll probably end up sharing them on Reddit and then see where it goes from there. But before that, I would like to be not quite as bad at the puzzles, and I would also like to be a little bit better at performing for you guys. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. See you guys later.